Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So, in the last class, we wrapped up the part of policy analysis called disequilibrium pricing, right? Why do you think we call it disequilibrium pricing? We talked about price floor, price ceiling, price support. Why disequilibrium? Do you have any intuition for that? Well, before that, we talked about equilibrium, right? What is equilibrium? What is market equilibrium? Let's try and review. What is market equilibrium? What is market equilibrium, guys?
When price point and quantity is equal to each other.
Say it loud, please.
When price point and quantity points are equal to each other.
When price point and quantity point are equal to each other. Well, the example we had in class, which was P equals, the demand was P equals 8 minus Q, supply was given by P equals 2 plus Q. Equilibrium price was $5. Equilibrium quantity was 3, correct? That was the problem we started with. Do you feel like these numbers are equal to each other?
Not the numbers.
Okay, so what is the equilibrium?
The level.
Level of what? Try it. Let's try it together, guys. What is equilibrium? How are you doing today? You'll try it. I mean, look. This is not a test.
It is the price at which the buyers and sellers are willing to buy and sell at an equal amount.
There you go. In other words, you're saying equilibrium is a price.
Yes.
Is that all?
No.
Is it just the price?
No.
It's also what?
It disappeared. The price at which
Is it also quantity?
Yeah.
And quantity supply, right? In other words, equilibrium quantity. Guys, look, the reason why these two numbers have an E subscript, equilibrium subscript, because they together constitute equilibrium. In other words, equilibrium is not a thing. It's not one thing. It's actually two numbers. In other words, if you want to say it concisely, you can say equilibrium is a pair of numbers, right? Why do you think I emphasize this point so much? Equilibrium being two numbers as opposed to a point. Because most people think of it as a point in a graph. Why am I continuously emphasizing that's not what equilibrium is?
Because you said this is not math class.
This is not a geometry class, exactly. If this was a geometry class, we talk about points and intersection of curves and stuff like that, right? But this is an econ class. Econ class is about economics. Econ class. Economics class is about economy. What is the economy? What is the economy, guys?
System.
A system that does what?
Turns resources into goods and services.
Into goods and services. Absolutely, that's what the economy does. Economy produces goods and services, certain quantities of goods and services. Does it make sense? Now, what do we mean by market equilibrium? Well, it is a market that produces certain quantity of good or a service, right? What quantity is it? It is a quantity we call equilibrium quantity. That's what economy does. It produces quantities of goods and services. So equilibrium is a quantity of a good or a service. What quantity is that equilibrium quantity? Well, that equilibrium quantity is the quantity the market produces at the equilibrium price, right? Oh, what is the equilibrium price?
$5.
It's the only price at which something is true. What is true at the equilibrium price that's not true anywhere else? equilibrium price and only at equilibrium price. Quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, which is equal to equilibrium quantity. That make sense? That's what equilibrium is. Equilibrium is a quantity and price such that at that equilibrium price, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied equals equilibrium quantity. Okay? Very good. So that's what we learned about equilibrium. We know what equilibrium is. And then we started studying price floor, price ceiling, which are forms of government policy, right? And now I told you that together, these forms of government policy, such as price floor, price ceiling, price support, that we studied in the last class, together, they can be characterized as disequilibrium pricing. My question is, why do you think that might be a fitting way to call those policies? Disequilibrium pricing.
Because it creates disadvantages either to the producer or to the buyers.
Does it? Do those policies leave the market in equilibrium? No, they knock it out of equilibrium.
Yeah.
So when the market is not in equilibrium, it is in disequilibrium, right? It's out of equilibrium. That's why we call it disequilibrium pricing. Absolutely. Very good. So those are prices designed to distort equilibrium pricing, right? Why do you think government would adopt policies like that, ever?
To get some tax revenue? Money?
We're not there yet. We haven't even touched taxes yet. Well, we commented on taxes a little bit, but so far we only analyzed price floor, price ceiling, price support. Did the government collect any revenue from either of these three policies?
Not yet.
Not yet, exactly. Not at all. So let's not go there quite yet. So why would the government impose price floor or price ceiling, guys? What do you think would be a motive when the government really doesn't get anything out of it, any revenue?
Oh.
Do you remember why price floor was imposed on apartments in New York City? Why those rent controls were imposed?
To prevent the producer to rip off the buyers.
Rip off? Every single time you get $4 gallon of milk in Publix, you get ripped off, right?
But in that way, it's similar to that.
I like that. I mean, it's a perfect way to elicit sympathy from someone, right? Oh, I got ripped off. Well, you are heading in the right direction in the sense. The reason why the government introduces policies such as price floor, or would introduce policies such as price floor or price ceiling, is because the government finds something wrong with the existing equilibrium price. What do you think government could find wrong with the existing equilibrium price?
Either it's high, either it's too much.
It finds it either too high
Or
for
too low.
consumers to pay, or too low for
For the
firms to
producer.
make a ton of money, right? Why do you think the government might ever find anything wrong with the price, for the price to be too high for consumers or too low for the firms? Why would that ever cross any government official's mind that there's something wrong with the price? How often do you turn on morning shows and you hear people talking about prices of chewing gum? Like, oh, this is outrageous. Those prices of chewing gums are so high. How are those kids going to chew this one? This is, you know. Or vice versa. Now, those prices of chewing gum are so depressed. Poor chewing gum producers. Wrigley's going to go out of business. All those thousands of workers. We should do something about it. Do you hear that kind of talk in the morning on TV? So why would the government ever get into that kind of talk? Because somebody raises an issue, some interest group, right? Consumer group or industry group goes to Washington, D.C., pays high-power lobbyists who approach the government officials, right? And it doesn't have to be at the federal level, it can be at the local level. and convince the politicians that there's enough political clout, enough political interest to consider equilibrium price to be an issue that needs to be dealt with. And then, if there's enough political donations contributed, if there's enough public awareness raised, the government may decide, okay, well, there's something really wrong with that price. People can't afford it, or firms can't make enough profit. So the government decides to make that price lower or to make that price higher. And the government can use this equilibrium pricing, such as price floor, price ceiling, or price support, to knock the market out of equilibrium to benefit someone. That makes sense?
Yes.
It's always about benefiting someone. Of course, it turns out that while the government happens to benefit someone with disequilibrium pricing, it happens to hurt someone else. Absolutely. And so that's what we were calculating, right? We were calculating all those impacts of price floors, price ceilings, and price support on consumers, producers, and of course on total surplus. And we found out, depending on what kind of a policy you choose, you may benefit consumers, harm producers. You may benefit producers, harm consumers. Sometimes you may even harm everybody, right? But ultimately, one result, one part of our results was always the same. Do you remember that one result we derived that always materialized, no matter whether we analyzed price ceiling, price floor, price support? One thing has always happened. What about total surplus? What was the impact of any policy? Say it again. A decreased total surplus, right? Total surplus always went down. In other words, disequilibrium pricing ends up reducing total surplus, causing the deadweight loss, and reducing efficiency of the market, right? That's what we always found out. Very good. Today, in the first part of the class, I'm going to introduce the last two types of policy we're analyzing in this session, and that's specific tax and specific subsidy. In the last class, at the end of the last class, we introduced the idea of these policies a little bit, right? First of all, do you remember what we said about what makes tax a specific tax? What taxes are specific taxes?
Excise.
Excise taxes. What makes them different from income tax or sales tax or some other types of taxes?
Because it is specific.
Specific in what sense? What's specific about it?
Like for instance, if it is a tax for milk, it's for milk. Or gas. I think it's retail.
Okay, that's not what's specific about it. What we mean by specific is that it imposes a specific dollar amount on a unit of a good, as opposed to a percentage.
Okay.
Okay? Like your income tax, your sales tax in Florida, 7%, right? Those are proportional taxes. Those are taxes in some way determined as a proportion of some underlying variable. Whereas specific tax is literally dollar amount. For example, $3 per half gallon of liquor, right? In an ABC store, or a certain amount per gallon of gas in dollars, not as a percentage, but in dollars. That makes sense? That's what specific tax means. Why are we going to study in this class the impact of specific tax and specific subsidy on the market as opposed to sales tax, which is proportional tax? Because it's simpler to analyze, and we will still learn all the important lessons we would learn the hard way using any other form of taxation, okay? So it makes all the calculations, number crunching, really, really simple. But all the important takeaways are right there staring you in the face. So, let's get down to business, and let's start analyzing the impact of a tax Now, do you remember in the last class when we talked about tax, what's the purpose of imposing tax? Because what we're going to present today is basically a coherent policy design. The government has a certain goal here. Do you remember the story we said in the last class? What is it the government is trying to accomplish by this entire taxation subsidy?
Money.
What about money? The government, again, is trying to make someone better off, right? Someone better off by subsidizing. For example, let's say the government decides to subsidize baby formula to help families in Jacksonville, right? Families with babies. So the government decides to subsidize baby formula. But in order to subsidize baby formula, the government needs to spend money on that subsidy. Where is the government going to get the money to spend it on the subsidy? It has to tax someone else to collect the revenue. Who do you think the government is going to tax?
Smokers.
For example, smokers, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to first impose a tax on smokers in order to generate tax revenue, and then we're going to spend the tax revenue subsidizing baby formula. That makes sense? It's very important to remember the underlying story. You would not believe how often I get calls when students are taking an exam and students are asking me like, oh my gosh, this doesn't work. It worked in class, but it doesn't work on the midterm. I'm like, well, what's not working? I'm trying to impose the subsidy on that market and numbers don't work. Which market? Well, the one that I was taxing. I'm like, wait a second, you don't remember the story. You impose tax on cigarettes and now you're trying to subsidize cigarettes. Does that make any sense to anybody? That's not what we're doing, right? That's why it's important to remember you're taxing cigarettes in order to collect revenue so that you can subsidize something like baby formula, right? So those are going to be two different exercises, really two different markets that we're going to deal with. First, we're going to tax, let's say, cigarettes. Let's suppose the cigarette market has a supply curve P equals 2 plus Q, and demand curve P equals 10 minus Q. This is the cigarette market. We're going to proceed in two steps. First, we're going to find market equilibrium. In other words, we're going to find the quantity of cigarettes and the price of cigarettes in equilibrium when there's no policy imposed on the market. And then we're going to impose a tax. And we're going to see what happens to the market when the tax is imposed. Does that make sense? Very good. Are you going to see this part of the board as we proceed?
I can.
Good, perfect. Thank you very much. So let's start with the equilibrium. How do we find equilibrium in the market, guys? What do we set equal to each other?
Where it intersects.
The right-hand sides of demand and supply, right? So we put 2 plus Q equals 10 minus Q. 2Q equals 10 minus 2 is equilibrium quantity is
4.
4. Very good. Equilibrium quantity is 4. How do we find equilibrium price? How do we find equilibrium price?
Plug in 4 to the equation.
Plug quantity 4 into either demand for quantity or into supply for quantity, right? So 10 minus 4 is 6. 2 plus 4 is 6. So equilibrium price is $6. Yes?
Oh, you were just explaining something.
Gotcha, very good. Make sense? Now, let's find consumer, producer, and total surplus in equilibrium. How do we find consumer surplus, guys? How do we measure consumer surplus?
Top triangle.
Top triangle, absolutely. How tall is the top triangle?
4.
4 times 4 divided by 2 is
8.
$8. Producer surplus?
Bottom triangle.
Bottom triangle. How tall is it?
4.
4 times
4.
4 divided by 2, 8. Total surplus? 16. Very good. So we have a market in equilibrium. And we know in equilibrium, consumer surplus, producer surplus are equal to $8. By the way, do they always have to be equal to the same number? No, it's just a coincidence. It's a nice symmetric example. And the total surplus is 16. Now, we are going to impose a specific tax. We're going to impose a specific tax. Specific tax of $2. That means $2 in specific tax will be imposed on each unit of the good produced and sold. Now, we're going to proceed in several steps. First of all, we're going to ask, who are we going to impose that tax on? Are we going to impose it on producers or consumers? That is oftentimes a question. Who should really pay the tax, right? If we're going to impose tax on cigarettes, do you consider smokers guilty enough of developing a bad habit that they deserve to be punished by a bad tax? Or do you think that smokers are actually innocent victims of a devious corporate policy aimed at hooking people on cigarettes?
Aren't the consumers going to pay the tax anyway?
Consumers are going to pay the tax anyway, regardless of who the tax is imposed on?
Well, yeah, if you put it on the producers, they'll probably just raise their
So
prices.
if you're going to impose a $2 tax on a $6 pack of cigarettes, on a pack of cigarettes that in equilibrium sells for $6, what do you think is going to happen to the price of cigarettes? Got up by how much?
$2.
By $2, right? Does your gut tell you that the price will very likely go from $6 to $8? Remember that, okay? Remember that intuition. So, here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to try and impose that tax on both. First on consumers and then on producers, okay? And we're going to see what happens. We're going to compare the results. So first of all, if we're going to impose that tax on consumers, tax on consumers, how is it going to change the market? First of all, which of the two curves represents behavior of consumers? Demand. How do you think the demand of 10 minus q how do you think that demand is impacted by a $2 tax imposed on consumers? Well, let's think about it. For example, what would be quantity demanded at price $5?
5.
At price $5, consumers would buy 5 packs of cigarettes, right? Now, suppose the government imposes a $2 tax on consumers. Consumers now have to pay price of cigarettes plus $2 to the government, okay? My question is, what do you think would be the highest price of cigarettes at which consumers would still be willing and able to buy 5 packs of cigarettes and pay the $2 tax? What's the highest price of cigarettes consumers would put up with and still buy 5 packs and pay $2 tax? C'est là? $3. Does that make sense? Why are you saying 3? Because if price of cigarettes is $3, consumers will pay a $3 price of pack of cigarettes, consumers will pay a $2 tax, and be willing and able to buy 5 packs of cigarettes. That make sense? Very good. Suppose the price of cigarettes is $9 a pack. At $9, consumers would be willing and able to buy how much? At $9, consumers would be willing and able to buy only 1 pack of cigarettes. Well, let's say there's 1 smoker buying a pack of cigarettes, right? My question is, what do you think would be the highest price this one hardcore smoker would be willing to pay and be willing to buy 1 pack of cigarettes and pay $2 tax? $7, right? At $7, that smoker would pay $7 for a pack of cigarettes, pay $2 tax, and be willing to buy 1 pack of cigarettes. Does this make sense? Very good. So now we have 2 points on the new demand curve corresponding to consumers' willingness and ability to buy those cigarettes while paying a $2 tax. What do you think the shape of the new demand curve is going to be? The new demand curve running through these 2 points. It's basically the demand curve shifted down. By how much? By how much?
22.
By $2, right? By the amount of tax. That makes sense? So, what is the impact of the specific tax imposed on consumers? How does this tax impact demand curve? It shifts the demand curve down by how much? By the amount of the tax. That makes sense? That's all there is to it. Now, of course, that we have this new demand curve, we have to ask ourselves, what's the equation of that new demand curve? Let's call that new demand curve D prime, after tax demand curve. What's the equation of the demand curve? P equals
8 minus Q.
8 minus Q. It used to start at 10 on the vertical axis. Now it shifted down from 10 to 8. And it has the same slope, right? So it's 8 minus Q. That's an ugly Q. That makes sense? So that's the impact of the tax imposed on consumers. So let's try and introduce a clean impact of that policy in this graph. So this graph shows equilibrium. Let's now introduce the impact of the tax. Tax imposed on consumers shifts that shifts the demand curve down by 2, from 10 to 8. the equation is P equals 8 minus Q. Okay? Now my question is, what do you think changes in this market? Do you think with this new demand, because consumers now have this new demand curve, are consumers still going to buy 4 packs of cigarettes at $6 a pack? No. How do you think the new quantity of cigarettes purchased in the market is now going to be determined? How are you going to look for it? You might look at it as a new equilibrium. The original equilibrium was given by demand and supply, but now we have a new demand. Can you see where new demand and supply intersect? They intersect here. I'm not going to necessarily call it equilibrium, because it's really not an equilibrium. It's a market knocked out of equilibrium by the tax policy. But the fact is that there's a new quantity of cigarettes that are going to be produced and sold. I will refer to it as Q prime, after tax quantity. Okay? How are you going to find that after tax quantity? Guys, here's where it starts being simple. You just redo the exercise. So, algebra boils down to setting right-hand sides equal to each other, right? Which two right-hand sides are you going to set equal to each other to find this quantity? Right-hand side associated with D prime, 8 minus Q, and the right-hand side associated with supply, 2 plus Q. So you just set 2 plus Q equals 8 minus Q. Okay? D prime and supply. Add Q to both sides, you get 2Q equals 8 minus 2 is 6. And Q prime is then equal to how much?
3.
3. So let's pause and think about it. Can you see these numbers?
Yeah.
Very good, thank you. First of all, tell me, what is the impact of the tax on quantity in the market, on the market output?
Decrease.
Reduces, right? So the tax decreases production of cigarettes, decreases smoking. Are you surprised? Is that something you would have never guessed? Well, it's pretty intuitive, right? That's what the tax does. Why do you think the tax actually reduces smoking? What about the tax actually convinces smokers to smoke less?
Because the price went up on cigarettes.
Because the price went up on cigarettes. Let's see just how low or how high the price is now. How do we find this price?
Plug it in.
Put 3 into the equation.
Plug 3 into which equation? Either D prime or supply. 8 minus 3 is 5. 8 plus 3 is, 2 plus 3 is 5. So this new price is $5. Wait a second, but you told me that smokers smoke less because price went up. And now we found out that the price actually went down. What's going on? Is it possible that you start taxing cigarettes and the prices of cigarettes go down? That's bizarre. What's going on, guys? Oh, wait a second. If that's the price of a pack of cigarettes, what about the $2? So if a pack of cigarettes now is sold by $5 by Philip Morris, by the cigarette company, consumer also pays a $2 tax. So how much is the total amount consumer pays? $7. 5 plus 2. You can also find that price in this picture by extending this vertical line up, and that gives you $7. Guys, so what really happens in the market is that there is no longer just one price like it was in equilibrium. In equilibrium, there was equilibrium price $6. That was the price consumers paid and producers received, right? Now that the tax has been imposed on the market, it's no longer just one price. What is the price the consumers actually end up paying? What's the out-of-pocket price consumer pays for a pack of cigarettes? $7. Is $7 what Philip Morris gets for a pack of cigarettes? No. Because of those $7 smokers are paying, the government takes $2 in tax, and what's left to the firm? $5. This is why we distinguish between two prices. The one consumers pay and the other one that producers actually receive. So the one that producers receive, we will call it the producer price. And the one that consumers actually pay, we call it consumer price. Okay? So unlike in equilibrium, there's a difference between what the consumers pay and what the firms receive. And the difference, of course, is $2, which is the tax the government has imposed. So you see, in equilibrium, cigarettes were selling for $6. The government imposed a $2 tax, and you told me that the price would go up to $8. Remember? Is that what's happening in this market? The price only goes up by $1. How is it possible? How can a $2 tax cause a $1 increase in price?
Because the quantity demanded is lower.
Quantity demanded, quantity supplied is lower, definitely. And as a result, consumers pay $1 more, but firms receive $1 less. In other words, the burden of the tax is actually split, shared. In this case, the burden of the tax is shared 50-50, right? $1 of the tax going to the government comes out of consumers' pocket. $1 of the tax on each pack of cigarettes comes out of firms' pocket. Is it always the case? Does every single specific tax result in a burden shared by consumers and producers 50-50? No, it's just a specific example here where everything is nice and symmetric. On the homework, you will try different problems, seeing different outcomes. But generally speaking, we see that even though the tax may be imposed on consumers, its burden is actually shared by consumers and producers. Okay? So that's the impact of the tax imposed on consumers. Now, let's try and redo the same exercise, only this time let's impose the tax on producers. Which of the two curves represents behavior of producers? Demand or supply?
Supply.
Supply. Supply in our example is given by P equals 2 plus U. Now, let's impose a $2 tax on the producer. Let's see what the impact on the producer is. Let's start with the following question. Suppose the price is 5. How much good are the producers willing and able to produce at price 5?
3.
3. Just plug 5 plus 3. So at price 5, producers are willing and able to produce 3 units. Now suppose the government imposes a $2 tax on the producer. So now the producer has to produce goods, sell them at a price, and then pay $2 to the government. My question to you is, what is the lowest price at which these firms would be willing to produce 3 units and pay a $2 tax to the government? What would be the lowest price they would be willing to sell those 3 units at and pay $2 tax and be willing to produce those 3 units? Say that? $7. Why $7? Because if the firms produce 3 units, sell each of them at $7, those firms then pay $2 to the government. How much is left to the firm? $5. And with $5, firms are willing and able to produce 3 units. That make sense? Very good. Do we need one more numerical example, or can you already tell me what will happen to supply curve in response to $2 specific tax? It's going to shift up. By how much? By the amount of tax, exactly by $2. So the new supply is going to look like this. Okay? The new supply is going to look like this. What's going to be the vertical intercept of the new supply curve? Well, if the new supply shifts up by the amount of tax, it's 2 plus tax of $2 is 4. What is going to be the equation of the new supply curve? S prime? 4 plus Q. Exactly. That's it, guys. It's that simple. And now the question, of course, is how is this tax imposed on producers going to affect the market? So let's go find out. Let me first of all clean up this picture, restore it without all those lines, extra lines, and we will analyze the impact of the tax. So once again, we have our market with demand P equals 10 minus Q, 10, 10, quantity, price, and the supply P equals 2 plus Q. We have equilibrium of 4, equilibrium quantity of 4, equilibrium price of 6, just like before. Now, let's impose a $2 tax on producers. We know it shifts the supply up by 2. There's a new supply curve, P equals 4 plus Q. Correct? My question is, are consumers still going to buy and firms still going to produce 4 packs of cigarettes with the new supply curve? No. What is going to be the new quantity?
3.
Q prime. How are you going to find that new quantity?
Set it equal to each other.
Can you see that in that?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Thank you. Set what equal to each other? You're right.
Demand S prime.
10 minus Q equals 4 plus Q. Very good. So when we set 4 plus Q equal to 10 minus Q, you solve it. You get 2q equals 6. Q prime equals 3. What is the impact of the tax imposed on producers on the quantity? Reduces quantity from 4 to 3. Compare that to the impact of the specific tax imposed on consumers. What is the impact of those two ways to impose a specific tax?
Same result.
Same result. Does it make any difference from the point of view of quantity, whether the tax is imposed on consumers or on producers? Makes no difference. How about the price? What is the price of a pack of cigarettes now that the tax was imposed on producers?
7.
Plug 3 into either demand. 10 minus Q is 7. Or plug 3 into new supply. 4 plus 3 is 7. In other words, consumers end up paying how much? $7 for a pack of cigarettes. How's that different from the tax imposed on consumers? It's the same thing. Does it mean that firms now earn $7 from every pack of cigarettes? No, because firms now have to pay a $2 tax. So how much is left to the firm from every $7 pack of cigarettes they sell? 5. Producer price, $5. Very good. So what do we see? What's the difference between imposing that $2 specific tax on consumers versus imposing that same tax on consumers? Is there any difference? No. Frankly, we see that how is the burden of the tax imposed legally has absolutely no impact on how the burden of the tax is shared economically, right? The nice way to say it is that the legal incidence of tax, it means who's legally liable for paying, the legal incidence of tax, is irrelevant in determining the economic tax incidence. In other words, what are the economic consequences of the tax? Economic consequences of tax have nothing to do with who is legally liable for paying the tax, whether it's consumers or it's producers. Does it make sense? So from now on, every tax problem we're solving, on the homework, on the midterm, on the final exam, who are you going to impose the tax on, consumers or producers? Makes no difference. I, as a matter of convenience, like imposing or like working with this picture better than with that picture. That's why usually you will see me imposing the tax on producers. But like I said, it really makes no difference. You can do it either way. Very good. Now, there's one more job left to do, and that is to explore the well-being consequences. The impact of that tax on consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus, right? So let's try and do it. Can you see this side of the board well?
I mean, the more angle you have, the less you lose.
Okay, so let's try here. Is that going to be better?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Again, it doesn't matter which picture we use, whether that one or this one, we're going to have the same impact on consumer, producer, and total surpluses. Of course, now that the tax has been imposed, I'm going to refer to consumer surplus as consumer surplus prime, producer surplus prime, total surplus prime. In other words, again, it's a before and after analysis, right? Equilibrium analysis, after-tax analysis. Now, how are we going to measure consumer surplus with tax. How did we measure consumer surplus in equilibrium? We measured the area of the top triangle. Basically same idea, but which is the top triangle? Look, yes, say loud. Yeah.
Where the 6 is?
Where the 6 is?
And
You're right, it would be 6, above 6, if consumers actually paid $6 for a pack of cigarettes. Is that the price consumers pay when tax is imposed? 7. All right, so it must be area of the triangle above the price, below demand. That makes sense? Can you see that small triangle on top? Very good. So that is consumer surplus. That's the measure of consumer surplus. How tall is it? 3 times 3 divided by 2.
4.5.
4.5. $4.50. Very good. How about producer surplus? The lower triangle. That becomes a little funky because there's too many lines, right? And too many triangles somehow.
It's 5.
Well, you would use 5. Why? Why? Because that's the price producers actually receive, right? And the triangle below 5, above the old supply,
It's 3.
is the one that measures producer surplus.
3.
3 times 3 divided by 2 is 450. All right, guys. So first of all, tell me, what is the impact of the tax on consumers? Do consumers like the tax? No, the tax reduces consumer surplus from $80 down to $450. How about producer surplus? What happens to producer surplus as a result of the tax? Falls from $80 down to $450. Does it mean that total surplus after tax is just $9? That would be reduction in total surplus from 16 down to 9. That would be a $7 deadweight loss. Is that what's happening? Isn't there someone actually benefiting? Look, consumers are hurt. Producers are hurt. The idea of a tax is not to make people happy, right?
Except the governor.
The idea of the tax is for the government to collect
Tax or the expenditure.
tax revenue, right? Tax revenue. Exactly. Do you think we should account for tax revenue when we're calculating total surplus? Absolutely. What is the tax revenue, TR, of the government?
$2.
$2 on each pack of cigarettes, because it's a specific tax imposed on each pack of cigarettes. If the government imposes and collects $2 on each pack of cigarettes, how many packs of cigarettes are sold after tax?
3.
3 packs. How much does the government collect?
$6.
$6. So it's specific tax of $2 times the quantity after tax, which is $6. That makes sense? Now my question is, should we add $6 to total surplus or subtract it? It's a credit, it's added to the government's revenue, so it actually increases total surplus. So total surplus is now $450 plus $450 plus $10. Plus $6. How much is that?
15.
It's $15. Very good. So what is the impact of the policy? What is the impact of the policy on total surplus?
1.
Reduces total surplus by $1. That's the deadweight loss of the policy. So again, the policy reduces efficiency of the market. Why? Because it knocks the market out of equilibrium. It distorts equilibrium, right? So that's how you calculate economic impact of the tax, of the specific tax on this market. Once again, it doesn't matter whether you impose that tax on consumers or producers. So these same results might as well be reproduced here. Consumer, producer, total surplus, tax revenue. $450, $6 tax revenue, $15 total surplus. Okay? And we have a complete description of the effects of specific tax on that market. Why do you think I reproduced everything on this side? Because after we return from the break, I'm going to give you a 15-minute break. After we get back from the break, I will erase everything on this side, and we will develop the second part of the story, the second part of the policy. Now that the government has collected $6 tax revenue, what do you think the government is going to do with those $6?
Subsidize.
The government is going to use those $6 to subsidize baby formula. Okay? And that comes after the break. Do you have any questions now? No questions? Okay, 15 minutes break. Thank you.